The next topic I wanted to talk about was what I've termed here Zuckerberg's new swagger. So let me set this up for you guys and you tell me what you think. I'm kind of summarizing a TechCrunch story here. Jordan, your alma mater. Over the last week, thousands of fans gathered at the Chase Center in downtown San Francisco to watch Mark Zuckerberg in a conversation with the host of the Acquired podcast. And, he's had a huge style change, the TechCrunch post is saying, with bouncy curls and a gold chain and Roman-style statues being commissioned for his wife, and he's on stage wearing a fancy shirt with Greek letters saying "Learning through suffering." His feeling, when they asked him kind of what's the biggest mistake you've made recently or in your career, and he said one of his biggest mistakes was a political miscalculation where he said that he took too much ownership of the problems that were allegedly put at Facebook's feet, that were said that like this is Facebook's fault. And people, politicians and media were asserting that they were responsible for things that he doesn't think they were actually responsible for. And they were actually political problems. And that some people are acting in good faith and identifying problems and trying to fix them. Presumably he's talking about himself and Meta. And there are other people out there just looking for someone to blame. I think that this is actually, just to set this up as a question, I think this is connected to a trend of tech billionaires pushing back on the political class, on the media class, and trying to wrest control of the narrative and of political power in some ways. I'm talking about everyone from David Sachs to Elon Musk. And I also think it's connected to something I've said many times on this show, which is that I think Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook get an unfair amount of the blame for some of society's ills. And I think it's a little bit of shifting blame from the political class and the media class. I've said that many times. And I'm not saying that Facebook is blameless, but as Mark put it here, there are good faith actors who are working to add little disclaimers and curate and tweak the algorithms. And there are bad faith actors like a Fox News or Congress who are actually doing nothing at all or deliberately making editorial choices to make things worse. I think it is time to push back a little on some of that bullshit. What do you guys think? I'm sure, this is a very unpopular opinion. I'm sure you guys will disagree with me. It's a very unpopular opinion to defend Mark Zuckerberg. But I do think in the interest of truth and justice, he's gotten too much of the blame. Jordan, I bet you disagree with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's not like that vehement, right? Like I do think that there are elements of what happened in 2016 and the kind of fallout around the 2016 election that were probably that Facebook looked like a really excellent boogeyman. I think part of the reason it looked like a good boogeyman is because like it kind of was a little bit of a boogeyman. Like and not in 2016. I'm not necessarily talking about Cambridge Analytica, right? Because I think those kinds of data leaks and manipulation of various platforms have one, they're kind of like part and parcel with running a big tech company that holds lots of data. And then also bad actors and nefarious actors coming in and trying to manipulate those things. It makes sense that Facebook would be such a prime target because Facebook was the biggest, juiciest, best target for what happened. Overblown, not overblown, whatever. Like none of that really matters. I will say that Mark Zuckerberg as a person, I think I'm a pretty big fan of. Just from what I see of him, what I know of him, I think he's kind of quirky and kind of nerdy. People make fun of him for being a robot. Like I think that he did something that other people weren't capable of doing. And he created a thing. Like and by a thing, I don't mean Facebook. I mean like the founder thing. Like I know that there were founders that came before him, but he is that to my generation, right? And so I have tremendous amount of respect for that. That said, when you say Facebook is like an easier target, Zuckerberg is an easier target to blame than like the media class or the political class, I kind of agree on the political class. But I think something that often gets forgotten is that media made the choices it made to come online, right? For better or worse. I don't think there was another choice, but there were options and variants that maybe could have made things better. When Facebook came in, unlike Google, that was kind of still differentiating in some way, Facebook really hampered the publisher's ability to disseminate information. And I think that is something to be sorry for to some extent because the traffic that came through Facebook and the way that every single outlet, whether it was credible or not credible, basically looked and felt the same, really, I think, not the only contributing factor, but was a big contributing factor in the kind of like, I don't want to say the illiteracy of the electorate. That's probably a rude thing to say, but like it kind of it, you know what I mean? Like we are, it was the beginning of the ushering in of this training of us to just look at headlines and not absorb into information and not put critical thinking to the test. And when you shoot the legs off the fourth estate, I think we're seeing the results of that. And I don't think Zuck was the only one with a gun in his hand, but he had a gun in his hands. Like, you know what I mean? Like I don't think he should be the boogeyman forever. I don't think we need to beat up Zuck forever. I think he earns joy in his success. I don't think he always has to be, right hand before Congress for the rest of his life or anything like that. But I think if you're going to build a business that literally changes the world, if you are going to have more of a high touch point with a higher volume of people than any of their governments or any of their I mean, like, any of their employers. I mean, like, we're talking about probably the person with the most power on the planet, right? Maybe him or like, Google or, but these big tech companies, these guys have more power and more influence over who we are as a society than anything else. And so you have to be able to look into the future to some extent. And a question I often ask founders when I am in later stage diligence is I'm like, you get to scale. All your dreams come true. Let's fast forward 10 years. Millions of people, billions of people, or whatever the perfect outcome is for you. What does society look like in the best way? And what is the worst possible outcome of that? Right? And
Mm.
just to like see if they're even thinking about it. Are you even thinking about like the dark side of what could happen when you are at scale, when your product is at scale and how it changes the world? And it's a thing that doesn't happen very often, I don't think. I don't think that everybody's just, and I don't blame people. They're in the grind. They're in the like day to day, like we got to keep going. We got to keep going. But
I tend to agree that like Mark has built something that has changed the world, or at least society, in a very, very meaningful way. And I think when you do something like this, you're always going to be criticized. Having worked on the API of Twitter, I can tell you that all these companies are being targeted for data mining. When I interviewed developers using the Twitch API, they were using the Twitch API to figure out which streamers are most popular so that they could create a third-party ad network in order to pitch
Mhm.
to those streamers. So like abuse of networks is given. And I think Cambridge Analytica was just like the one that got caught. There's tons of these Cambridge Analyticas that are happening all the time. And if you look at misuse of a network, you just need to open X and look at what Elon has been doing in the last few weeks. It's basically turning Twitter into the biggest donation contribution to an electorate in the history of the US, right? It's basically donating $42 billion for a candidate and turning Twitter into a tool for a certain party. Now, when you look at this type of abuse, you just need to think about what are the tools that we're giving and what are the incentives that we're giving. And I think one of the biggest common sins that this industry has is being ads driven. Because to Jordan's point, the reason why we're showing just the headlines and we're not driving people to think is that if people think, they go to another app. But if we show them nice, happy, funny cats, they stay on the app. So thinking does not promote ad clicking. So the entire interaction is driven by a business model that turns us into feed consumers. Even the word feed is like horrible here because we're like being fed this type of data. But I think if Facebook would have been a paid service to begin with, and their fiduciary duty was for the customers, we would have a very different type of product. So I think at the industry level, we might have made a mistake by moving everything to ad.
when you think about content moderation, it's a similar thing to the reason that Elon bought Twitter, or his said reason, right? His alleged reason is like, censorship and freedom of speech and all of the, we could get into all of that. But I think the point is, do you think that Twitter and Facebook and these things are public utilities? Because we've seen in the past for-profit businesses turn to public utilities, be subsidized, and then also be kind of like put under certain rules and regulations with regards to access and what they need to do from the government. I'm not saying that that's the best play here, but there's like a if it's your private space, if it's your private thing that you determine the rules for, then I think you take more responsibility. If, you want to shirk some of that responsibility and say someone else make the rules for me, then, you also have to subsidize it, maybe think of different business models. So I think you can't have it both ways.
So I've got a whole bunch of thoughts about this. So let me try to be as pithy as possible. Jordan, you said the phrase data leaks, right? The data leaks from Cambridge Analytica. This is, one of those narratives that I'm really struggling with. I struggle with at the time. I struggle with now.
There's
It
no
was
doubt about
never a data leak. It
No,
was data portability, right?
Right.
It was the thing that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but certainly for me, that we were advocating for, that we were
of
pushing
course.
on Mark Zuckerberg and others to say, hey, open up these APIs, give us access to it with user permission. And guess what? The users gave these apps permission. And so there was no leak. There was no selling of people's data. There was nothing nefarious going on except by Cambridge Analytica, who chose to use the data for ad targeting. And that was their right almost. That was their privacy policy. They just did it more effectively than anybody else.
Right.
And so what we were upset about was that they were effective. And having worked inside Uber during the most controversial period, a lot of what the media was pissed off about was that Uber was more effective at commercial and capitalist behavior than other companies, right? It's like, oh my God, you have surge pricing. Uh-huh. So do airlines and hotels and strawberries and anything else you can buy in the marketplace. It's just that Uber does it in real time and is transparent about it. Oh my God, how dare you put your prices up? It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is the basic market dynamics, right? And so that's the thing there. It's not a leak. Facebook is not selling your data. Facebook is giving you access to your data to give to third-party apps that you grant permission to. They granted permission, the users. And so
Yes.
this is part of the throwing Facebook under the bus that drove me crazy. You mentioned that they looked like the boogeyman because they were a boogeyman. I think they also looked like a good scapegoat, and to this day continue to look like a good scapegoat. And I think that's a little bit bullshit, right? I do think that the underlying problem is political. I think it's education. I think it's poverty and wealth inequality. It's money and politics. It's all this stuff that Facebook does not and cannot control. And, I'm not even convinced, Amir, that switching from ads to paid changes very much at all, because what we're talking about here is, again, a company that was very, very good at making itself very, very useful to people, or at least perceived to be useful, where it was triggering those dopamine hits. Whether you pay for it with ads or you pay for it with subscription fees, in order for it to remain generating that feeling of usefulness or dopamine, you have to have an algorithm that puts stuff in front of you that triggers your attention and your interest. Otherwise, people will churn. They'll churn and they won't look at the ads, or they'll churn and they won't pay the subscription fee.
But there's a difference between churn and time. Like, specifically, when you have an ad business, you're trying to get people to stay as long as possible. And in other business models, you just need to create a habit that is a daily habit. Like, Google does not
That's
want
fair.
me to stay on Gmail for 12 hours. That's not their target, but Facebook does.
Yeah.
That's
And I
fair.
think you're convoluting utility and dopamine hits. Dopamine hits aren't actually like useful. Like there is a utility to be provided with Facebook, and their focus was never on that.
Yeah, but some products and services, their utility is dopamine, like entertainment, for example. And so yes, Facebook can and should have other forms of utility, reconnecting with friends, what have you. But social engagement, its ultimate real goal is dopamine, right? It is soothing that loneliness that we have. But I do agree with you, Mir. Like this question of like, well, I don't need you to be on there glued for the rest of time, sure, but I do think they're going to have strove for maximum engagement and time spent anyway, depending on irrespective of the business model. But certainly, ads incentivizes maximizing that. That's a fair call. Putting it all the way back to the beginning, I do like his new swagger. I
Yes.
do think it's been enabled by or inspired by, for better or worse, by an Elon Musk, who is a little bit of like, fuck you, fuck the world. I'm going to
I
be
don't
who I
think
want to
so.
be.
Oh, no. I don't
All
think
right, let's have that debate. But I do think that again, there are a lot of things Elon's done that I find distasteful and problematic. He has broken the ice on shedding staff and driving optimization. He has broken the ice on kind of first principles thinking and throwing out a lot of sacred cows. He's broken the ice on showing to the degree to which you can have a lot of swagger and pushback on the narrative and you can get away with it. And I think that a number of people are following in his footsteps. But let's have that debate. But the reason I like the swagger most of all is because I've wanted a Mark Zuckerberg and others in his position to call out the other equally bad or perhaps more complicit bad actors in the ecosystem. I want him to stand before Congress and say, hey, how about you mofos pass some laws? How about you fix the education system to have media literacy as a subject? How about you guys drag in Fox News in here and talk about their editorial policies? How about you guys stop mugging for the camera and start actually passing some real laws? And I want him to say that. I want him to call that shit out because there's no one else in a position to do that on such a big stage. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the swagger. Where do you think the swagger is coming from?
Well, I think that Elon is a meat shield in some ways, right? Like I think that he is like this person that is out there doing enough bad shit in enough bad ways, right? To like make Zuck feel a little bit more comfortable saying like, I'm gonna do weird videos on social media and I'm gonna call out, other people and I'm like, let's fight or whatever he's doing, right? Like the last couple years we've seen him come out of his shell, maybe. But I don't think
Mhm.
that's in an effort to be more like Elon. And like,
No, no. No, I'm not saying to be more like Elon. Just I think Elon's broken the ice, has given permission to people to, yeah, as you said, the way you're putting it is a good way, is created cover, but also I think demonstrated just how far you can go and still be CEO. Actually, the other way to put this is he's moved the Overton window, actually. He's moved the Overton window into how crass and bold and rude a CEO can be. I'm not saying Zuck's trying to be on the right side of that Overton window, but he's certainly now able to play in a different space.
and I don't think he's trying to be those things for those things' sakes, right? Like, I think here's a question. I think Facebook is actually, if we're thinking about the spectrum of things, and you take all of Elon's companies and you put them over here on the spectrum of minus Twitter. Let's get rid of Twitter for a sec. The ones he founded, right? Not the ones he bought, are,
You're going to get a
in
bunch of
my mind,
fanboys. You're going to get a bunch of anti-Elon people saying he didn't found Tesla either, but that's it.
nobody knows where to find me. I don't want to hear from any of you, to be perfectly clear from the audience. I would rather hear from none of you. They're net good. They're like net very positive for the world, right? Like technology wise. I think that that's all awesome. Facebook is like somewhere here in the middle where like it provides utility. I don't like when you say like it's to fix loneliness. Like I think there's like plenty of studies that show that like Facebook products have made us more lonely. So like whatever. But like it connects people. It like gives us access to people we've lost and like we can share photos and like whatever. And then you have Zuck, who's like also here in the middle, who I think is like probably closer to the side of net good. Like I think he is a reasonable, pragmatic, very brilliant person who thinks really
Mm,
hard about problems and then like tries to do that in the best way possible. And then you have Elon over here, who is like, in my
yeah.
mind, just like way over on this side of not high quality in terms of like net good for society. Like I think he's red pilled and like I have generally bad vibes about him.
I mean, I generally agree with you, right? He's become chief troll on the most trollish network that he himself has made a troll farm.
If you look at Elon, he's become the Trump of tech. And that's not a good experience. And what I'm worried about is that his fan base is acting like him. The problem with these type of people is that they promote behavior like that. I actually see Zuckerberg as the responsible adult. I think he's grown and think he's shown thoughtfulness and responsibility that I hope more founders are gonna be that. So when I look for traits for founders, be more like Zuckerberg than like Elon. He has like the passion for customers, he has the thoughtfulness, he has the introspection that I really like in founders.
I absolutely agree. I've said on previous episodes, thank God we have a Mark Zuckerberg running Facebook, and just look at the comparison, like look at what the alternative is. And I think he's been very thoughtful. I do think that particular comment at that particular event where he's saying, I think we apologized too much. I think that is a little, there's loosening up, there's growing your hair out, wearing some chains and taking photos of yourself surfing, which I think is just healthy and great. And he's coming out of his shell. And then there is, I think we apologize too much and I'm not going to do that anymore. That is within the Overton window that Elon's moved to the right. A little bit of it's just a taste of fuck you. Like, stop it. Stop blaming me for shit I didn't do. And
But
and I think that's a flavor of that I think is not
But
bad.
I think these are two very different responses for what actually happened in politics. Like there was such a strong force for companies to say, "Hey, media, you're responsible. Like platforms, you're responsible, and start moderating and stop this and don't stop that." And I think that's the pushback that you're seeing. Platforms are saying, "Hey, some of the problems are not ours." To the beginning of your point, some of these problems should be regulated
That's right.
and some of these problems are cultural. So I think that these are two very different responses, strong responses, but very different responses to these movements. Like both Elon is just shitting from the stage. And I think Zuckerberg is taking a responsible adult position of saying, you're right here and you're wrong here. And I'm not going to apologize for saying this is my stance. And I think that's important.
Yeah, no, we're enthusiastically agreed. Amir. I'm saying Zuckerberg is a much more measured, thoughtful, pragmatic person. I just think Elon has shifted the Overton window to give him a little bit more confidence to say, "Hey, that part's not my fault." I'm just saying, just a little bit of credit there to say he's nowhere near. The two don't stand next to each other. I'm saying it's about the Overton window. It's a large window and has been moved. And that's I think we have to kind of acknowledge that Elon played a role in that.